Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you are. Welcome to Reedsy Live this fine Wednesday. I'm Martin from the team at Reedsy, and I'll be joining you for the next hour or so as we go through my favorite recurring segment here on Reedsy Live, which is our cover critiques. But seeing as we've hit the hour, I'm going to bring on my co-host for this afternoon, evening, morning. Micaela, how are you doing?
Hi, how's it going? I'm sorry I won't be able to get through everyone's cover. So I just thought I'd make a few pointers that you can take away if we don't go through your cover today. So first pointer, less is more. And I just want to be clear that the less chaotic you make a cover, the more legible it becomes online, the more it stands out on a bookshelf in bookstores. So try and keep away from packing on too much onto the cover. Secondly, is don't be too literal on the cover as to your story. The cover is meant to coax your audience and less to tell the whole story in the cover. And when I start talking about fonts and typefaces, when I say serif, for those of you who don't understand serif and sans serif, serif are the fonts with, the nice little twiddly bits. And the sans serif are the nice straight fonts without any twiddly bits at the end. And, I encourage everyone who's wanting to look for a cover designer or trying to do it themselves, look at the covers in the genre that you're aiming for, especially the bestsellers. Look at what they're doing, their color palettes, their fonts, their images, and try and see where your cover will sit between them. And I would also say try and avoid drop shadows on titles and strokes where possible. Try and keep the type clean. As I said, legibility is quite important when people are trying to scroll through Amazon or on a bookshelf. We want your cover to jump. And for self-designers out there, creativemarket.com is a really good place to find really cool fonts. So if you're struggling with fonts, go to creativemarket.com. It's great. And make sure you have your pen and paper because I'm about to go through the covers. So cover number one, we've got Murder in the 1%. Thank you so much for submitting your cover in. And I think this has a lot of potential. And I love the blue. I think that's really relevant in the marketplace. So for a murder mystery, I think it's worth looking at what the genre is doing at the moment. So the notes I would say, things that you could try getting rid of the main silhouettes of the man and the woman, as well as the cars in the shot. I think the house is a great focal point, and it can draw the eye just alone by itself, and make it look more desolate, a bit more eerie. Maybe add a stormy sky instead of a starry sky. If there's too much to look at, then it can get a little unclear what the message you're trying to convey, because the house and the setting looks a bit eerie, but then the couples look like they're having a great time. So yeah. And I would also say try and keep the title in a sans serif like you've done in the word murder, but try and keep that a bit more cleaner without the grungy bits. Because thrillers do usually prefer tall sans serif fonts, like Trade Gothic, like Gotham, like Nutriface. They're all great fonts. I would also get rid of the wine glasses near the author name. I don't think it's doing anything for the cover. It's cute, but I don't think it's needed. And so I've got some comparative covers that would sit in the market. So things like Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, Our House, While You Sleep, Other People's Secrets, Out of the Dark, just to get you started. I think these really would work well. An eerie house setting, even in doing a close-up of a door or just a roof, can really work well for your cover and make your title much bigger, so people can read it out. So hopefully that's good tips. On to the next cover. We've got a cute little illustration. I absolutely love this illustration. I think it's really sweet. And I think it's definitely right for the market. So I think whoever did this is great. My tips for you would be maybe it's worth making the illustration just a little bit smaller and making the title go over 2 lines, making it a bit bigger. Try using more playful font, as the font is looking a little blocky and uninviting compared to the really cute illustration. And maybe it's worth trying an option with a bright colored background, just because the market for these books tend to have a lot more brighter, cleaner backgrounds. If you look at the comparative books that I've got, you got really colorful, really stripped back, nice central illustrations, and I think your illustration's perfect for that. So maybe give it a go. Maybe putting, a nicer, softer typeface and a nice bright background, or even try white. So yeah.
What would
Next,
you say this specific genre is called? I sort of see these around the bookshops quite a bit, but never know how to put my finger on it.
They're mainly chick lit women's fiction, your cozy fiction covers. So yeah, the women's fiction is a very massive market. So everything has its little umbrella areas.
Sorry, just dip my oar in just to
No, please. Yeah, great. So hopefully that's enough pointers for you to just to revamp the cover a little bit. So yes, this next cover, The Wrong Side of 25, I absolutely love this. What you've done is great, and I think it really works, and I think it's really fun and quirky. And I think for YA crossover to adult fiction, I think this is great. My only comment is maybe to center the sign a little bit more, as it's sitting quite heavily at the bottom. So maybe bringing it up into the center of the cover would work better, because it feels like something's missing at the top. Or even just try making it a bit bigger. And also, again, for this one, YA is a bit of a colorful market, so maybe finding an option with a bit brighter background could work as well. But I don't have any comparative covers for this because I think it's great and I think it's really sitting well in the market. So well done. Next, we have a crime novel called Turnkey Condition. This is meant to sit in the chick lit cozy mystery market. So to be brutally honest, I don't think this cover works. If it needs to sit in the chick lit cozy mystery genre, as it's a bit too busy and the typeface and the donut kind of make it look a bit more humorous than crime. So my advice is that you can really improve on the key concept, and maybe just focusing on that and finding a nice eerie key in a nice setting, and then bringing up the typeface bigger. As I said before, crime and thriller, can work with serif and sans serif fonts, but choose one and don't bring too many fonts into it. I don't think the scripty type really works, but I think the sans serif that you've used on Turn and Key really works well. So maybe making that bigger and focusing on the key. So I did get a few comparative covers that are working really well in the market. So things like Obsession, The Silent Patient, Bad Mother, The Teacher, all of these have, the window, the chair, the flowers, the apple, something that's a focal point that could really work well. And this kind of works well in that market where it's not overtly crime, but a bit more psychological, bit more cozy mystery. So yeah, hopefully that's a bit helpful. And if we just go back to that, see how the comparative covers, some have sans serif fonts and some have serif fonts. So so you can use either. But yeah, I would say find a good key concept and run with that. The next cover is Barry's Tale of Two Bostons. I think if you're aiming for historical marketing, if you're the historical market, then you're getting there, and there's a lot of potential. I would say, firstly, the cover doesn't really need the red behind the text. It's almost distracting, and it's not letting the titles and the author name pop. So I would say you don't need that. Just get rid of it, and stick to the black background if you want. I would also say a quick note on the shout line. Maybe shorten it to just a couple of words. The shout line is used in order to kind of coax someone into wanting to pick up the book and read it. So if it's too small, then people kind of don't feel the need to want to read that subtitle. So I don't think it's really working having two really long lines. So yeah, but I absolutely love the use of imagery. I think this really works, and I think maybe play with trying using just one historical character on the cover, maybe two, but go from there. I think your typefaces are great. Maybe it's worth changing the color of the author name to white, so it just it's not so close to what the title is doing, and maybe bringing the title up a bit. But the comparative covers I've got for this market, more historical, kind of almost historical fiction, but touching on his history more, is, you've got Victoria the Queen, where it's and Leibniz on God, where they're a bit more zoomed up. They're giving the title room to kind of breathe and be a bit more legible. But you've also got Charles Darwin and the Victoria cover in the middle, that kind of had that central point, which you've already done, which is great. So hopefully that's a bit helpful on how you can kind of improve it, but well done. I think it's a great cover, and I think the colors are great. So next we have a nice techno thriller for you. So I think, again, to be brutally honest, I don't think this works. I'm sorry. I think the book reads non-fiction as science non-fiction rather than techno thriller. So if you're trying to aim for a techno thriller market, I would say change the typeface to sans serif, more thriller-esque, like Trade Gothic. Make it bigger. I would also get rid of your title as Doctor. I know you've worked really hard for Doctor, but it is quite confusing when it's a fiction book rather than a non-fiction book. But by all means, add that to your bio on the back of the book, on the Amazon blurb. But maybe make your name bigger. And yeah, I think also if you look at covers, the comparative covers for the techno market, I love this market, by the way, it's great. So Mind Machines, Nomad, Dark Matter, Cyberstormer, all of these are really making the title the biggest focal point in the whole cover, and then adding these kind of abstract patterns, kind of more techno-y, more DNA-esque, which I think is great, but it's making the title your focal point. And I think this could work really well because you've got a good balanced title. So maybe have a look at these to try and improve. I do like the colors on your cover, but I do think it does read a lot more non-fiction. So if you want to grasp this market, making your typefaces a bit more bolder, a bit more squashed together, and a bit bigger will work in your favor. Yeah, so next, Wilder's Prize. This cover is really great. I think there's a few pointers that I encourage you to do, but I think you're really nailing. It does look very fantasy. I think it's leaning more towards adult fantasy and less YA. So I've got a few pointers to kind of make it a little bit more appealing to the YA market. So I think less is more can be really crucial to this cover. First, I think focus on changing the sub-name to something like Book 1 in the Wilderstorm series rather than Book 1 Wilderstorm, because that can read like the title rather than being part of what the series is. But to be honest, I don't think having Book 1 on your covers for any fantasy people out there really needs it. This can be put on the spine or the back, or even just a blurb on Amazon or wherever you sell it. It doesn't necessarily need to be on the cover. But if it does, make it read on like a shout line rather than a title. Yeah, so I would change the font to something a bit more, something with a bit more life, a bit more fun. If you can find great fonts on Creative Market for fantasy that work really well. Things like Marshall or Artisan, all of these great fonts are out there. Orpheus. This typeface, the way it's placed, can feel a little 80s fantasy and not very appealing for young people. If you're aiming for the YA market as well, too much use of brown can make your cover become a little less memorable. So I would say strip back to maybe a white or blue background, or even a black background. Make the ship more of a central image, without the waves, without the floral bits in the corners, and that subtle compass in the back. Make more of that as a background, kind of very subtle image, but make the compass less slanted and more right flat behind the ship. Or you could try making the ship a silhouette and putting maybe waves inside or something. I've got good comparative covers. So I did a book called Stormtide, where I used the whales and I put an anchor and a sunken ship inside the image. And then I have a little bit of a wheel faintly behind it. I think that kind of gives the cover a bit more room to grow. But one of my favorite authors, Robin Hobb, her covers are beautiful. And again, subtle compass in the background, making the title breathe a bit more. But you've got Tether Mage and Lancelot, which are also great as well. So give that a go and see if what you come up with. And hopefully that's really good good advice. Yeah, so next cover, let me scroll on down. We've got a mystery thriller, Nuyuki. I absolutely love this image. It's so beautiful. So wherever you found it, it's absolutely gorgeous. I just think the way the cover's been put together, it's nice, but I don't think it's shouting mystery thriller to me. If you like to keep the image, and please, try and keep the image, play around with it, I would say it's worth aiming to change the font to something more crime associated. As I mentioned before, using more condensed caps, titles, something a bit more bolder, making and if the snow setting is kind of the main setting in your book, there are loads of other ways you can get crime across on your cover, but still avoid that woman in the red coat running on the snow look, which has been done to death. But still works, by the way. So covers, comparative covers such as Baby Doll, You Let Me In, The Suspect, Dark Pines, Flowers Over the Inferno, Ragdoll, Girl on the Ice, all of these are good snow settings, icy, coldy settings, but work well in the marketplace. Blue covers, white covers, really stark white covers, maybe bringing in a bit of red into the title could work quite nicely, especially if it's an overtly white cover. I think it will bring it out into the mainstream crime a bit better. But yes, try and keep that image. I think it's gorgeous. And if you look at Girl in the Ice, that is a close-up of a woman, just like yours. So have a shot and see how you go. Next, sorry, I'm trying to go through all of these because I've got so many covers to go through. Next, Tangle of Time. These are beautiful and the covers pop quite nicely. But if you're aiming for a more new adults book, I think the typeface is a little young for the market. So I would say maybe it's worth trying to look for a typeface that's still fun but less a bit jokey in that sense. I know this kind of works for a kind of Alice in Wonderland movie, but maybe not so much for a time traveling kind of new adult YA fiction fantasy crossover. So I'm leaning towards the cover without all the elements. I think the elements don't really work well together because they're all different illustration styles. So if you are trying to use illustration, I'd either hire an illustrator or find illustrations that are of the same kind of style rather than loads of different ones, because it can look a bit chaotic. Again, your cover doesn't have to be literal. It doesn't have to tell your whole story. It just needs to invite the reader in and make someone want to pick up the book. So I think if you do want illustrative route, make sure they're all consistent, or maybe even just using one illustration rather than so many in the in the border. So if you look at covers such as, which is all of these covers, comparative covers I've got are time traveling ones, or play with time in a sense. So How to Stop Time, absolutely love this cover. It's so beautiful. But again, it's just using one little focal illustration and making more of the type and the surroundings a bit more space to breathe. But you got a nice, beautiful pattern in The Psychology of Time Travel. Or Tuesday Mooney. I'm comparing, the Tuesday Mooney, which is the US and the UK cover. So UK is the top one and the US is the bottom one. Both doing different things, but it's worth, looking at both the UK and the US market and how they differ. Sometimes they've got the same covers and sometimes they don't, just like these. So it's nice to see how these two countries do it differently. So hopefully that will give you a better idea where your cover will sit in the market. But yeah, go with the more stripped back cover, but just try and find a nicer typeface that can really work better in this market. Next, we've got
give you
Are Your Kids Naked?
There we go. I thought I'd give you a second to catch your breath. Just to let you know we're making a good time, so no worries about that. In case you want to get a glass.
I'll get a bit of water.
Someone asked whether we'd be sharing these slides later on. This entire video presentation will be available on Facebook Live as soon as we're done. Also, if you registered through Eventbrite to get here, I'll send you an email, hopefully by Friday, with an edited version of this, which will have the full presentation as well. But yeah, these examples are sort of good to pull, as Micaela said. It's great to look to what's working and trending in the market and to see what works for you. But yeah, it's going really well. I'm going to sort of prime up the next one and let you get on with it. But yeah, making great time, so no worries there. Sorry, are you still there? You may have frozen for a moment. Potentially. Maybe we can't quite handle 3 different pictures here online at the same time. Just give me a second, everyone. She's popped off just for a moment, but as soon as Micaela's back, we'll have her back on. You probably don't want my opinions right now. I think I see her there. Just give me a second.
Sorry, I don't know what happened.
I think the system just couldn't handle the sheer force of I'll pop up again. Hopefully, there should be no snacks from now on.
Okay, sorry if everyone, if you're watching, if my camera stops again, just be patient with me. Okay, next one. Are your kids naked online? This is a great topic, and I think really important. And this is, I believe, our first nonfiction that we're talking about tonight. So I think this cover can work quite well, but I think the concept of less is more can really work for this as well. If you look at the nonfiction market at the moment, type and title-led books are dominating over photographic-based books. So maybe trying a version of the cover where the title is the dominant aspect of the cover, and maybe the social icons without the photograph can work really well on the sides or as a small aspect of the whole thing. But I don't think you need the image. And also trying to stick to a color palette of 4 maximum colors could work really well. I feel like this one, I am reading the title first, but my eye just doesn't know where to follow on after that. So so maybe sticking to kind of a 4-color palette would work quite nicely. Your title tells what the book is about, and for nonfiction, you know, the hierarchy of everything is major title, major subtitle, and the author name. And just because the subtitle carries on from the title for nonfiction and just tells the audience what they're going to get. So for stripped back comparative covers, I've got things like Hello World, Zucked, books like Because Internet, Off. There are other books called Essentialism or Selfie. All of these work really well, you know, with bright, zingy colors or you know, very stripped back color palette, and using your title to really hone in the audience rather than images. But again, as I said, bring in the social icons if you want some images. I think Hello World is doing really well in that, in using bubbles as a part of the subtitle, but really stripping it back, I think works really well. And you know, these kind of covers are really dominating the nonfiction market at the moment, and yeah, and I think a lot of people are picking these up because they're fresh, they're simple, and they're telling you what they're going to get. So, and especially for ebooks, these work really well as well. Yeah, so hopefully that's some good tips. For nonfiction, as I said, just use your title as the primary source of honing in people and your audience, and using your subtitle as the hook to get them to buy the book. So next we have another nonfiction. It's called Stop Suffering and Start Understanding. This is a self-help book. This has the potential to work well in the market, and it's so great that you managed to get an illustrator to work on this. So well done you. My suggestions would be just to try a sans serif font rather than a serif font, because the serif font is looking a little dated. And with a sans serif font, using something that's a bit more condensed will make your title have the opportunity to get a bit bigger, because the word understanding is quite a long word. And maybe it's worth bringing the heads down a little bit to give your title a bit more room to grow. It's maybe worth looking at an option where the faces stay, but then using the background as just a simple color as well. So comparative covers that I've got that work really well with this is Mindfulness is a beautiful foiled cover, but it just lets the cover breathe, and there's something so serene about that space. But you've got, you know, the Power of Now, the Nature Fix, Hooked, something using, you know, a nice illustration as your center point, but letting your title have room to breathe, and not letting kind of layers upon layers clutter your cover too much. Again, less is more. That's my mandate for the day. and especially in the nonfiction market. So hopefully that's a few good pointers. Also, one last thing is let your subtitle read out a bit better, because as I said, nonfiction, your subtitles are what draws in readers as well. And maybe getting rid of the outer glow that you have on there as well, just because it makes the text look a little blurry when it's small. Yeah, so next we have something we can this way comes. This is a super cute cover, and I think it can work really well in the women's fiction romance. But from my note here, it says it's a paranormal romance. So if you're trying to avoid using the paranormal aspect of the story, then stick to it. I think it's great. But if not, I think it's worth finding an image that can work with the balance of paranormal and romance. Just because right now it does say romance to me, and but it doesn't say paranormal. So another thought would be the scripty type on Wiccan. It's cute, but it's very hard to read what it reads out. And I can't believe I'm the person that says this these days, because I used to get really angry at my beautiful scripty types and people telling me it doesn't read. But it makes such a difference when your title does read out. And maybe it's worth making the whole title the same color and then changing the author name to a different color, just so it doesn't read on, because the author name almost looks like it's a part of the title. Again, I don't think book one needs to be on there. Just make a good punchy strap line, and you're good to go. But if you do want a hint of paranormal, I would suggest making the background a darker color, just to give it a bit more of a sinister edge. Changing the title to more fantasy typeface, so something less nice and magazine-y, and something a bit more kind of overtly fantasy, so like Orpheus, Artisan, all these nice fonts. So things like these comparative covers. The Furies is something that I did just recently, which does have a kind of paranormal witchy element, but it is focused on high school and girls. But it does have a little bit of that sinister edge. But things like, dare I say it, Twilight, Beautiful Creatures, the Mortal, what's that series called? But the Shadowhunters series really works. Mortal Instruments works really well for that paranormal kind of YA market genre. So hopefully that helps. But as I said, I think your cover's nearly there. I think just making the title kind of more consistent would work really well. So yeah. Next we have the Mermaid Pool. I think the image of the girl in the water works quite nicely. You're trying to find this into the cozy mystery genre, I believe. So I think the girl in the water looks really works really well, but I think the background image is a bit confusing and a little distracting. So maybe it's worth just getting rid of that completely and keeping it stark and focusing on the water. And try and stay clear of underlining the title, just because I don't think it does anything to your title. And also trying to change the typeface. I know Papyrus is a great typeface, but I think choosing something that's a bit more bolder and a bit easier to read can work a bit better, especially if this is playing on an Agatha Christie story. It could also work trying a version with just a hotel on the cover, with the title in the sky, and without a human element, just as an extra option. I would also get rid of the vignette and the border that you have on the book cover. I don't think it needs it at all. And also, if you do have your author name in the water I would turn it to white at least, just so it can read out a bit better, because right now it's just getting a bit lost. But for comparative covers, for cozy mysteries, obviously Agatha Christie is a favorite, and I think this cover works really well in the bottom left. But this new book, well, Reedsy new book, The Last Mrs. Parrish, is doing really well and is doing exactly what you're aiming for. You know, it's slightly sinister, but also cozy mystery. And again, Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle works really well as well, because it has that kind of nice female touch to it, but at the same time does have that sinister edge. So yeah, so I would say changing the title typeface, keeping the girl, but maybe getting rid of the really distracting background could work really well. Yeah, and with the pool images, you know, The Last Mrs. Parrish does that really well. Both the UK, which is on the left, and the US, which is the middle one, works really well. So hopefully that's helpful. We've got our first children's book of the night. Next, this is great, Yara's Tawari Tree. I think this is such a beautiful illustration. So well done on getting such a great illustrator. I think it's super sweet. And the style is super unique, which I absolutely love. I think my only suggestions is getting rid of the different colored strokes on the titles and leaving them as simple block colors. It doesn't need an outline, I don't think. I think it's you've got a fun, quirky typeface, and I think just letting that do its thing without any kind of borders or strokes could work really nicely. And if you can, try and integrate the title with the full image rather than having to block out the color to separate the title. It might work more harmoniously as a whole. If you can make the background of the illustration less detailed, just for the front cover, so that the text can read out, that would look fab as well. So good examples of these would be one of my favorites, Oliver Jeffers, his books, the Gruffalo books, for comparative covers. A good one for you would be, there's a tiger in the garden, which is using loads of these leafy things, but it has stripped back the background so the title can read out on the white. The Moose Belongs to Me, again, has a nice landscape, but the title does read out. And they are all simple colors. So I think you have loads of potential, and you have such a beautiful illustration. I think it's maybe just letting the text read on top of that illustration might work a bit better. But overall, I think it's great, and I think you've got a great illustrator. So kudos to them. And yeah, and maybe making your name a little bit bigger, and the illustrator a bit bigger. I think it's getting a bit lost. So yeah. Also a note to everyone, if you are a debut author, or you know, it's your first book, don't feel the need to make your name massive on the book. Massive titles such as Lee Child or kind of Robin Hobb or anything, they have massive names on the covers because they've almost become a brand. You know, George R. R. Martin, they're brands within themselves. So using their name really big on the cover is a form of getting people in. But if you're a debut unknown author, it doesn't necessarily have to be too big. Let your title win people over, and don't make your name so big that it takes up a lot of the cover. But this one instance, I would say make your name a bit bigger and the illustrator a bit bigger. So yeah, next we have Agents of Disrupt, Nanotech. This is so cute. I love the little people in the what do you call them? The little jets. I think they're so cute. Cute, maybe not the best word, but I think they're great, and I think they work really well on the cover. And I believe you're trying to carry this design across 10 different books in the series. So in order to be able to do that, I've got a few comments. So I would say, firstly, get rid of the gradient in the background. Replace it with just a simple block color. I think that will work a bit better than the gradient. I think the gradient works a bit better in the 80s and less now, especially if you're aiming for the science fiction kind of cyberpunk genre. And I think it will balance the illustrations a bit better. I would also get rid of the two white lights on the kind of top and the bottom. I don't think they really work. I think they're almost quite distracting and you don't really know what they are. So I don't think they're really doing much for your cover. Yeah, so just getting rid of that and maybe making the jet bikes a bit bigger could work really well. Again, I'm a fan of bigger typefaces for this genre. So making your font a bit bigger, maybe bringing them back to straight on rather than on the side, and playing with that. And, you know, carrying a different color background for each one in the series could work really well. Colors can work quite well if you don't want to change the image on the book. So great. I found one cover which I absolutely love as a comparative one, and a book that's one of my favorite top 10 books is Ready Player One. And I think this works really well because you got the little guy inside the one and the little key, which is very suitable for the book and the story, but it's letting the title using kind of a science fiction typeface really play on the whole cover, and using the small little elements like you have on yours to play their part on the cover. But then again, one word kill Mark Lawrence works amazingly as well. So worth looking at these. But yeah, that Ready Player One was the first thing that popped into my head when I looked at your cover. So have a think, and yeah, have a go at you know, taking in those notes. Next, we have The Last Minder. We've got, yeah, so this is aiming for science fiction. I think you've done really well in making it very science fiction-y. I wouldn't have put in any other genre, so well done. I think it, yeah, definitely speaks sci-fi to me. There's only a couple of notes I have in order to make this pop a bit more. Currently, the cover is looking a little busy. My suggestion is to definitely get rid of the cat eyes because I don't think it's doing anything. And again, don't be too literal on your cover. It's just to get an audience to pick up your book and have hints of the story rather than being completely literal to the story. Yeah, so I think get rid of the cat eyes. I would also make the debut line and your author name just a little bit smaller. Going back to my point before, as if it's a debut book, your name doesn't need to be massive, but make your title bigger. I would say carry it over 3 lines, so The Last Minder, and making it a bit bigger. I would move the silhouette and the ground a bit further down to give more room for the title. Font really works, but maybe bring it over 3 lines, and maybe just worth looking at just a starry backdrop without the city and the UFO. And I would also take the rise of line at the top out of the black line because I don't think that really works at the top, as there's no silhouette at the top, so it just looks like a line. I found some really cool comparative covers for this. So I'm sure you guys have seen the wool color cover. I absolutely love that cover. I think it's gorgeous. But you know, Children of Time, 3-body problem. I think they all do the sci-fi thing, but at the same time have a little bit of an element, which you do have, but you know, stripping back the background a little bit and making it pop a bit more. So focus on that starry sky and focus on that that silhouette, and see how it goes. Yeah, so next we have, sorry, bear with me, Written by Blood, Conviction. So I think Do we have that up? Yep, there we go. This is thriller, crosses into techno thriller category, possibly post-apocalyptic, sci-fi. I think this is a fab start. Definitely speaks thriller and post-apocalyptic to me. Oh, that's a very hard word to get your tongue around after you've been speaking for so long. There are a couple of notes. I would take the banner out from under the text, the lines, as well as the lines with the stars. This doesn't really do much for the cover. I would also change the font to more straighter typeface like Trade Gothic, Gotham, or Knockout. There are too many different typefaces here, and at the moment it's getting a little confusing. Take written by blood over 2 lines as well, just to make it a bit bigger. I would also get rid of the blood in the corner. I don't think that's doing anything for the cover because the man with the gun really speaks thriller to me, so you don't really need that blood splatter. I would also try options with the man closer in shot and then maybe a more silhouette, smaller option. So if you look at comparative covers in this market, kind of like the thrillers like Andy McNabb, Lee Childs, Matthew Riley's, who I absolutely love, and also an Aussie, are great examples for this, where you've got a man either fully silhouetted or slightly silhouetted, but then using your bolder font to make it stand out more, and it will catch better on ebooks as well if your title is a bit bigger. And especially for those ebook only authors, your title reading out is super important because most people are only seeing them as thumbnails, and not so much bigger, bigger versions like you do in bookshops. So that's important, especially in this world where we've got Amazon and all these other stores where you can buy books. Making your title really read out is really important. So next one, we're nearly out of time, but getting there slowly. We've got The Consultant, which is an adult thriller. This is a really good start. It really speaks thriller to me. I think the font is great for the main title and the subtitle. I think maybe it's worth changing your author name to the same typeface just for consistency. I think trying moving the title as an option to the top and then the subtitle and then the author name at the bottom. Move the door and the silhouette down a little bit, just so you've got room for the title. Also, I would get rid of the texture of the cracks on the door and bring up the contrast a bit more so you can see the silhouette, because right now I can see that it's a silhouette, but it does get a little lost. And you don't really need that texture because then you can't really see the door either. But so far so good. I think the subtitle, it seems to be getting lost in the margin a little bit. So I would bring it in a little bit just so you can read it a bit better. Especially if you're playing with kind of book covers, just imagine there's an imaginary margin that you want to constrain your title within, just so it doesn't get cut off in the future if you're printing it or if you're putting it up as an ebook. And I would also say play around with different colors on the title as well. If this book is getting printed, greens aren't very amazing at being printed in CMYK, but things like yellows are amazing for CMYK, that they usually print almost like a Pantone. But yeah, greens are very hard. Blues are also very hard to get that kind of poppy, zingy effect. And so comparative covers, try looking at concepts like the couple next door, the unwanted guest, any thriller by Lisa Jewell or Claire McIntosh really work well. They're playing up their title, but then they also have that kind of human element inside it, whether it's a silhouette, like Watching You, I think works really well. So hopefully that's enough to kind of just spruce up a little bit more of your cover, but I think you're nearly there. Next, got 2 more. We can do this. Fanon to Canon. I love the covers on these, but sadly, I don't think the cover speaks YA high school romance to me. I'm sorry. I'll start firstly with the title font. Script, and for any YA authors out there, script and hand lettered type is perfect for the genre. The amount of hand lettering I'm doing for YA books at the moment is insane. It really works well in the market, but I would suggest try looking at a more legible scripty type, just because the ends are getting lost on these especially. So something a bit more bolder and a bit more fun. If you do want to work with type only covers for the YA market, doing something that's a bit more of a bolder scripty type would work really well for this. And also bolder colors would work really well in this market. So if you look in comparative covers such as The Hate You Give, The Sun, hopefully, yep, we've got them. All the Bright Places, Everything, John Green's Turtle All the Way Down. I think all of these are, type led, but do really well in bringing in a bit more fun nature, just for your YA audience to really focus on these books. So hopefully, finding a nice bolder kind of background, finding maybe a small element that's true to the story and a bit more of a bolder scripty type, and I think you're there. Last one, we've got 10 minus 10. This is a thriller, and I love that you gave this a crack, but sadly I don't think this cover really speaks thriller at all to me. Firstly, the book is called 10 minus 10, so I would suggest maybe spelling out the whole title without using the dash, because it can read 10 10 instead of 10 minus 10 if that's the case. I would also make more of the title again, make it a bit bigger, and maybe centering your name a little bit more. If you are looking at putting faces on the cover, I wouldn't put a painterly effect over them, because it's not really working for the thriller market at all. It almost looks a bit sci-fi fantasy to me. I would also make the faces more ambiguous, and make the cover a bit darker, so that it speaks a bit more to the thriller market. And making the font for the title in all caps and a bit more bolder, and a single color would work really well. I think it's getting lost with too many layers of effects on these. So for comparative covers, just to get you an idea of the market, and with faces as well. By Caroline Kepnes. Both the Netflix, I think, works really well for what you're trying to aim for, and also the original cover works really well. The Wife Between Us, again, got almost an ambiguous face, but you've just got that human element there catching you, and maybe black and white, bold color on top, and then a nice legible font and color on top of that would work really well. Again, before you go to sleep, the eye is really catching, but I would say if this is being sold on ebooks, making the font a bit more bolder and edgier would work really well. And you do have a small title, so I think it could work quite nicely. So yes, I think that's all we have time for today. And I'm sorry if I've talked too quickly for you guys, but hopefully you've got an idea of everything. And hopefully, I'm sorry if we didn't get through your cover today, but hopefully I've given you tips for certain genres for you guys to work with.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to pin your profile details right here to the top. Folks, just head over, check out her portfolio. It's really fantastic. Thank you, Micaela, for joining us.
That's all right.
I'll be sending out an email later this week with a link to her profile as well. But thank you all for joining us and sticking around this long. Hope you have a great day, and best of luck with your books and your covers. See you soon.